Greetings, and it's wonderful to hear all the stories in our introductions about who's here today. We're a very rich audience, I'd say, from different continents and backgrounds. What we're trying to do with this day is look at the spiritual traditions of Iran and the West, and why they seem to have been locked into this struggle, this kind of life and death struggle that's bedeviling Middle Eastern politics. Even as we speak today, 15th of September, there's riots and violence in the streets of many Middle Eastern cities, attacking Western embassies over issues to do with depictions of Muhammad, the Islamic prophet, in a film. But there's always this kind of bubbling tension in the Middle East that doesn't seem to be happening in other parts of the world, to do with religion and perceptions of what is sacred, what is secular, where do you draw the line. Those bring lots of difficult theological issues, philosophical issues, right? The institute here that's hosting this seminar is an Institute of Peace Studies and Philosophy, and I've had a duty coordinating the work of philosophers around the planet for some time. And if philosophers can't figure this out, I don't know who else can, really. Somehow we have to get secular, spiritual, religious attitudes to life to be able to engage with secular and humanist values and agree a kind of common agenda for the planet if we're going to build peace. That's what this seminar is about discussing the background to the current problems of the Middle East. The other problem we're going to be looking at today is the complex situation of Israel and the religious solution to the problems of how Judaism can coexist with Islam and with other neighbouring countries in the Middle East. How can we get a long-term peace and security for Israel? Tiny little country that was birthed after the Holocaust, after World War II. And there is a tension, I've learned from speaking to people, on all sides of the thing, between Israel and Iran. There's rumours that sometime, in the late autumn, there's going to be a preemptive war launched by Israel against Iran. Now, whether that's just false propaganda, negative propaganda, who can say? Or whether it's an actual military planning that's going on. I've actually been in touch with the Foreign Office about this. The allegation is that because Iran has nuclear weapons capacity that's being built up, therefore Israel is justified in launching a preemptive nuclear an attack to destroy those facilities. Now, in international law, that raises huge issues, which I've written to the Foreign Office about. And my view, as director of the Institute, is these things should be resolved through international law, non-violently, through discussion. My understanding is Iran has said that they have no intention of building nuclear weapons. Indeed, a nuclear bomb is haram in Islamic law. And the supreme spiritual leader of Iran has said that there's no way ever they will build a nuclear bomb. I don't see why the international community can't accept that at face value and maybe ask for proof, put it in writing, sign it in blood. But I mean, you have to judge people at their word, surely. So these are some of the issues we're going to look at, the theological background to this. It seems to me we've got a stark choice facing mankind at the moment, in the Middle East particularly, but it would affect the whole world. Is either we can have a kind of third world war with nuclear weapons flying about within a year or 2 or 10, and we all go up in smoke, or we have to have a kind of nuclear peace where we get to the heart, the kernel of these problems, these issues. Nuclear energy is the thing that's locked up inside the heart of being, the secret of the atom. Metaphysically, I think, if we go into the heart of these issues, the kernel, we can find a solution to these problems, spiritually, if we really engage with fundamental questions of identity and love and the divine energy. People talk about God glibly, but actually what that is, that's what we're trying to do here in the castle with our Centre for the Study of Divine Intelligence. Actually, what is that divine intelligence? My reading of history and comparative religion is that divine intelligence wants peace, and all the great prophets and teachers have argued that. So look, that's kind of a basic introduction to what we're doing here today. And I'm very grateful. With our first speaker, we've got someone representing the ancient religion of Iran, the Zoroastrian tradition, okay, which is appropriate because Iran is a very ancient and noble culture with a very long history and ancient history, and the Zoroastrian faith was their core faith. And we have the president of one of the Zoroastrian leading world organizations here to speak to us and tell us about the history and something of the Zoroastrian traditions in Iran. So let me welcome you to take your seat. And maybe you could introduce yourself again and say something about the organisation you're representing. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'm Shaheen Behradnia, and currently I'm the president of the WorldZoroastrian organisation, which was formed in about 1980, at the time, soon after the Persian-Iranian Revolution, where many Zoroastrians who had been living in the land of their ancestral faith felt that the situation was far too precarious, and they left Iran, and as a result of that, displaced persons needed help and representation. And at the same time, anyway, because the world was becoming more global, there were many Zoroastrians moving out from India as well and Pakistan, where they had traditionally been living. So a world body was required, and this is why it was set up. And its main task and mission is to help Zoroastrians in any way which they can when requested for help. This could be medical help, representation in front of government, asylum cases, it could be educational grants, it could be all sorts of help. It's not restricted in any way. And also, main mission is also to spread knowledge about Zoroastrianism, both amongst Zoroastrians themselves, many of whom have by now got a very perhaps distorted idea of what Zoroastrianism is, and also to make sure that the rest of the world also hears about Zoroastrianism and knows something about this ancient faith. And I'll preface that by saying that we are such a small number today practicing that is why perhaps the mission of making sure people know about us is all the more urgent. We are down to not more than about 125,000, and if you want to be very optimistic, maybe a little bit more than that in the world. Our numbers in India, traditionally known to have been the larger population, have been drastically declining for various reasons that I will go into later. And the current figure is less than 70,000 Parsis, as they are known in India. And in Iran, perhaps, if we're lucky, 12,500 actually still in Iran. It should be said that there are probably 50,000, if not more, Iranian Zoroastrians who are living outside Iran now, because the birth rate amongst Iranian Zoroastrians is very healthy, whether they're living in England or in Spain or in America or Canada, where there are larger populations, I should say, not large. But we are nevertheless still in fewer numbers than the Parsis, whose birth rate is in drastic decline, and so the balance will probably be re-equilibrated, I can't say that word, I won't say it, it'll be rebalanced in, recalibrated is what I should have said. In about perhaps 10 to 15 years' time, there'll be fewer Parsis than Zoroastrians from Iran. But the problem is that we are living outside our homeland, and a culture which is dispersed needs a critical mass to continue. Now, why and who are we? Well, we relate the name Zoroastrianism, to the prophet. If you want to call him a prophet, a messenger, a visionary, a spiritual leader. And the word prophet suggests that he had predictions of things to come, and it was not that he did, and we don't ascribe him with supernatural powers to look into the future. But what we do know is that there was a man who walked on this earth, probably walked in Iran or the Iranian plateau, the greater Iran. And I've brought a map to show, because Iran today is perhaps not as well known in terms of its geography in the world, so I'm going to show you that here is Arabia, and here is Persia stroke Iran, and here is India. So it's the land that's in between the Caspian Sea to the north. And we know that the prophet Zoroaster, or the visionary, I don't want to call him prophet, I don't like that word, the visionary Zoroaster, came from somewhere in this territory, but as you can see, the shading here is a little bit wider than the modern-day Iranian territories, and that's because there was a time when all this area was linked without borders and was known as Greater Iran, and so it is now more and more thought that he probably came from further west than further east than he is normally ascribed, probably the mountains of the Pamirs in today's Tajikistan, around this area here. And some people would have said that he was from Azerbaijan, which is on this side of the Caspian Sea, the land of fire, because that's what Atar means. But actually, I think that's probably not acceptable now that we have linguistic tools to establish his origins. So somewhere around here, a man who was part of the Indo-European peoples of Iran, of Iranian background origin. And it is the language that helps us determine where he came from and the date that he lived. We know that the ideas that have given rise to Zoroastrianism are contained in a language known as the Gathas. I'm just going to get that. The Gathas are, if you like, the words that are ascribed to this visionary. This picture, of course, rather like any picture of Jesus or Moses or any other prophet or visionary, is not one that can be in any way verified. It is an artist's impression of what a holy man might have looked like. And as you will see, if you look at a picture of Moses or Jesus, it's usually a man in a long beard with long hair and flowing robes, and this is no different. It's simply a reverential idea of what a holy man should be. This is the text in translation English and Persian, modern Persian writing here. So this is simply a translation to modern Persian and English. Why modern Persian? Because I come from the Iranian tradition of Zoroastrianism. So I read, or I speak modern Persian, Farsi. But the language we're talking about, the Gartic language, is an ancient language that is related not so distantly to Vedic Sanskrit. And it is on that basis that we can put a date to Zoroastrianism, on the content, the linguistic analysis of the language. And words and roots are very, very similar. The linguists who work on this have done comparative linguistics. They're using the sound shifts, consonant shifts, and so on, verbal form shifts between, let's say, modern ancient Greek, and looking at Russian, Slavic languages, looking at Sanskrit, looking at all the languages in the world. They can locate and reconstruct a Proto-Indo-European root. So the language of the Gathas is one of the most ancient embedded languages in the corpus of prayers or reciting texts that we have. The general corpus is known as the Avesta language, the Avesta corpus, and it is really a matter of texts that have been recited by heart and passed down and down and down because they were considered to be sacred. And then on top of those basic texts, then came people who would translate them, because over time, and we're talking about 1300 or 400 BC, if we are to go with that reckoning by linguistic scholars, those texts, they weren't written texts, they were verbal texts. Those verbal texts were learnt by heart as poems. They have a rhythm, they have a certain quality that makes them identifiable as songs or poems. And of course we know that songs and poems can be learnt by heart much more easily because they have a rhythm, and they can be, and they have a rhyme as well as rhythm. So that this was passed down. And on top of that, after centuries when they just became nonsense rhymes to some people, like Latin might be to some people who might have said Latin Mass, there was a translation provided for the people of the new generation. And that new translation became part of then what was handed down. So that actually when you start analysing the Avesta, which is the like the religious text of the Zoroastrians, you will find that much of it is the same basic idea in three different layers of language, one from the ancient Gartic language, one from the younger Avestan language, and maybe one from the Pahlavi and later period of language. But they're known as sacred texts, and when they pair them back and they start analysing, they find at the heart of them the Gathas. So the Gathas contain the message of Zoroaster. And the people who chose to follow that message became the people who identified then with Zoroaster. And we are known as people of the good religion. That was one of the names before it. They didn't all say we were Zoroastrians. They might have said we were people of the Mazda Yasni religion, because we recognized Mazda, Ahura Mazda, the wise Lord, as the person, the guiding spirit that inspired Zarathustra or Zoroaster. Now the word Zoroaster is a Greek word. It's a Greek rendering of his name. And indeed Persia is a Greek rendering of the country from which the people that the Greeks fought came from. In fact, we call it Iran. Iran is an ancient word It's not a modern, invented word by the West. It is just that the West recognised that Iran was the original name. It means land of the Aryans. It's connected with the word Aryan. So Iran was the homeland. Persia was the state from which the Greeks got to know these people. And so Zoroaster is the Greek name for him. Zarathustra is the word that you will find in more ancient scripts and texts. And then we have, of course, that use of the name in Nietzsche's Thus Spake Zarathustra, or Richard Strauss's music, Thus Spake Zarathustra, and so on. So the name has come to the West as well through other people, not just Zoroaster, but Zarathustra as well. So that's the background history and where he came from. Now, I think more importantly is what was the message, probably. What was the message? Well, the message actually, I think, is a very modern message, a message that is a dynamic one, that is not static. It is therefore appropriate for all times and all eras. It is a message for mankind, for humanity, and it is not a message for a particular race or a particular peoples. And clearly, if Zarathustra was to have anybody to follow, then it had to be that people were allowed to adopt the ideas and join the brotherhood or sisterhood. And in a nutshell, the basic message that, well, there are a lot of ramifications, but the basic message seems to me, and this is an interpretation that I have shared with other people who are priests, who maybe have the authority to say, well, that's an interpretation that we can accept or not, is that we all have the capacity for good and evil deeds, good and evil thoughts, and good and evil words. In other words, we are a complex psychological makeup, but inside us there is the capacity to judge, and we know what things will lead to the betterment of humankind and what things do not. They only lead perhaps to the temporary gratification of the self. And so it is exhorted in the Gathas, and this is the kind of main message, that we should be conscious of the struggle, the inside struggle, our inward struggle, our conscience. Be conscious of that choice that we have to make, and to be therefore aware and fully alive to the right choice that we have to make. And to get there, to make the right choice, we need to be consciously on the right path. The path that maybe you could see as a kind of Taoist path, the path of Asha. Asha is a linguistically related word to the word artha, and artha to the Sanskrit concept of harta, R-T-A, the right path. So we have to be on the right path to make the right decision. And there is a complex process in the Gathas about getting to the right path. We ask for good thinking, vuhu mana. The word mana to do with thinking, as indeed, and the two spirits that guide us, or the two spirits that struggle within us. The positive spirit that leads towards positive deeds is called sepentamenyo, and the energy that can take us towards negative outcomes and maleficent deeds is called angramenyo. So we have this internal struggle to get there, to get onto the right path of Asha that will lead us on the right road. We have to have clear thinking, vuhu mana. So we ask the wise Lord, and the question is, who is God? What is the message? Ahura Mazda is the name that Zoroaster uses when he is trying to arrive at right thinking. He said, please, wise Lord, help me with righteous thinking, right thinking, to get onto the right path and spread this message. The right path, Asha, is arrived at through Vahu Mana, good thinking. And the imprecation is to Ahura Mazda, the wise Lord. Now, people ask, what concept of God does Zoroastrianism have, does Zarathustra have? We say, first of all, that probably this vision that Zarathustra provides through the songs in the Gathas are the first indication we have of a monotheistic religion. The first religion that suggests that there is one creative energy, one force that has brought forth everything else that we know, that we call nature, humanity, mankind, that puts us all into interaction together. But we don't really have a concept of the right, well, we don't have a concept of the God being a human being or an anthropomorphic form or having any sort of physical attributes. It is in our heads. The concept of God is inside us, in our heads. It is very difficult to conceive of a God that is outside ourselves. So it is an internal process, an internal understanding, an internal contemplation of what is this energy that has given forth life. We can all see that there is life. We can all see that there is energy. Even in plants, you can see a plant respiring. We respire. We have life. And when something is dead, it no longer respires. Plants die, they don't inhale and exhale oxygen and carbon dioxide, nor do we. So life is definitely there. It is a life force that we have, we are born with. It is an energy that is within us that gives us life. Where did that come from? We contemplate nature as a manifestation of this energy, and we are part of nature. Life and death is part of the natural world. We are born with an energy, we expire, that energy goes somewhere. It doesn't just disappear, it goes and joins the natural cosmic energy, the whole. But what we are doing is, in a sense, trying to understand, trying to come to grips with the mystery of life, the mystery of nature, the wonder of this wonderful world we live in, and our place within it. And that is what the Gathas addresses. It asks for understanding of our place in society, our place in the harmony of nature, and how to create a good life while we are here, for all of us and each of us. So the Gathas, although very thin in its content, and having survived for 3,500 years virtually to get to us today, has some very, very profound thinking within it. And we see Zarathustra, the modern name Asher Zarathustra, or Zarathustra or Zoroaster, and I will use these names, and I do use these names interchangeably. The question is posed, where did it all come from? What put the planets into motion? What made the wind blow? What made the earth give rise to flowers and plants and food? How do we find our way? What is the right path to be on? Please give me enlightened thinking, wise mind, wise Lord, inside this head of mine, because it's not going to come from anywhere else. And so that is the heart of what we talk about in the Gathas. It is this constant realization that it is up to us. Nobody else can take responsibility for our actions. We make the choices. We make that internal decision. Are we going to go along the right path or the wrong path? Have we arrived at that understanding? And many people say, well, how do you know what's right and wrong? You know, what's good for the goose is not necessarily good for the gander. It happens to be a basic rule, I think, of humankind, that what you don't want to happen to yourself by somebody else's hand is the basic value system that you want to establish to lead to harmony. Now, some people say Asha is the right path. It's the path of harmony, discipline, order. And if you keep harmony, discipline and order in your own life, then you are already going along the right path. And then within that you have to work out what is going to increase the betterment of good, the increase of good. Because the struggle that we are involved with is the struggle to make life a better place. We only get one go at it. We don't believe in being pretty laissez-faire and perhaps indolent, lazy, inactive, because we believe that that is the right way and that later in the afterlife we will make up for it. We are taught that we are here once. What we know is what we know. We know that we are here. We don't know what's going to happen in the afterlife. There's no point in speculating about what might happen next and just giving up on now. We believe that it is our duty as human beings to strive to improve quality of life for ourselves and for mankind. If everybody, it's a very obvious situation that if people around are comfortable and content, then there will be less reason for aggression and resentment, less reason for jealousy, less reason for strife and bitterness. And so if we can help by improving our own lives and then the lives of other people, then we're going to have a much more harmonious society. So my message as a child from my parents was, you know that there are other ways to go that might be shortcuts to what you want, but they're not going to be the honest and good way. The equivalent word balance against Asha, the right way, the path of order, the path of progress, the path of virtue, is the lie, the deceit. So that, if you like, Asha counterparted, countermanded against drudge, deceit and lying. And the idea of being good is equated with being pure in thought, word and deed, therefore being honest, not telling a lie, being honest in your dealings, showing probity and integrity when you have financial transactions. And one of the important basic concepts is the word mithra, meher, which is what it is today. Mitra, mithra, which you find in the Indic pantheons, when once upon a time we believe that the Iranian peoples and the Indian peoples had a common clan before they parted company in those proto-Indo-European days. The idea of mithra or mer has come to mean, and did mean probably then, the concept of contract, the concept of trust, of honesty of dealing. And that really lays at the foundation of human interaction. If you want to have a society that works, you've got to be able to trust somebody. And therefore this path of honesty, probity, truth, ashar, order and discipline is totally in keeping with maintaining your contract, keeping your word. And the opposite of that is to ignore that obligation on humankind and to take the path that might be easier, that might get you short-term gain, but you have gone the wrong way by this time. And we say that it is an important thing to be able to sleep light and easy at night with a good heart, with a clear conscience. And we all know that if we've done something that we are slightly ashamed of, or we know that it's not the right thing, it eats at you at night when you're lying in your own bed. You know, it does get into your head, it does get into your conscience, unless you're a person so hardened by your own ability to commit dishonesties and evil deeds that it no longer affects you. And I think there are very few people like that, I suspect. I think that we are all basically the same human beings with that same capacity to worry about things that we know we haven't done right, that we regret. So it is a very simple, instruction. The question is how to follow it. You know, we all know that that is what we should do, but it is very much drummed into us as children. I don't know, I can only talk about my childhood, and I know many other Zoroastrians, like my cousins and my family and others that I know. And then we can talk about what outsiders see of us. As a child, I was told that the most important thing was to tell the truth, that we were famous for that and we should not let the side down. And that, I found out much later, was actually commented on by Herodotus, a 5th century Greek writer, who said that when the Greeks were fighting the Iranians, and theoretically the Iranians were the enemies of the Greeks, nevertheless the Greeks showed great respect for many aspects of the Iranians that they knew, who were by this time Zoroastrians, we believe. And one of the things Herodotus says is that the Iranians teach their children to ride a horse, to shoot a straight arrow, and to tell the truth. And that was already a national characteristic that the Greeks were acknowledging in the 5th century. So that was a very all-pervasive kind of quality that the Iranian Zoroastrians were famous for. And it was certainly drummed home to me, you know, that we must be honest. We have a reputation for our honesty. And that is something that we can be proud of and we must continue, whatever the temptations are. And I have to say that it wasn't just Herodotus who observed this. We have, from about the 16th century, Western people travelling towards India as India became, first of all, occupied by the Portuguese, and then later on the British took an interest in India. More and more people began, and the trade routes opened up and the travelling became easier. From about the 16th century, we have a series of travellers, Portuguese, Silva de Figueroa, we had French Chardin, we had Belgians, we had Germans, we had all sorts of travellers from the West going towards India, travelling through Iran. And many of them wrote their travel memoirs. And they were saying that even when they arrived in Iran, they were conscious that there were Zoroastrians there, albeit a very small and depleted population. But they were distinguished from the others by the fact that they were several things that distinguished them. First, they had cleaner living quarters and cleaner areas than the people around them. That they treated their women as equals, and their women were in company of men quite regularly and commonly. And thirdly, that they were distinguished because of their honesty in dealings, and the travellers, Curzon and Sykes were the 19th century ones, who said that they would prefer to have Zoroastrian servants because they knew that they could trust them, that they would not have light fingers and disappear with their goods. So these are things that we hear and read in travellers' accounts. So it's not that I wish to blow our own trumpet, but that is something that Zoroastrians were noted for. Now, coming back a little bit to the message and the history of the religion, we date it to, as I said, about 1400 or 300 BC from the linguistic content. We don't know quite how the religion picked up and got going. We are told in the Gathas and later accounts that the king of Balkh, Vishtasp or Gushtasp, adopted Zoroastrianism as his chosen religion. We believe that at the time, from the Gathas, we have an indication that the people of Iran were probably pagans or animists who didn't really understand how the universe worked, probably very similar to the Hindu pantheon. They believed in different energies and spirits, which they gave names to. Nature elements, probably. And in the process of change, Zoroaster had to some extent, incorporate what already was there under the system that he was creating. So that Mithra was not thrown out, although never mentioned in the Gathas. Mithra did survive as an important concept to which Zoroastrians still pay respect. For example, our temples are called the door to Mithra, Daremer. So that, you know, some of these concepts that were probably there before Zoroastrianism survived side by side with. But the basic moral, ethical teaching of Zoroastrianism is probably the biggest legacy that Zoroaster brought to our tradition. And as I mentioned, one of the parts of the Gathas, which I find very attractive, is this awe and wonder and mystery element. Where did all this come from? Why do we have this amazing regularity of the seasons coming round, the cycle of the year, the knowledge that we will have spring where there is rebirth on the first day of the spring equinox. Spring will come, things will come to life. And indeed, I don't know if one has noticed it anywhere else, but I was in Iran during the spring festival, and that is our new year. We begin the year with the arrival of spring, because spring brings new life. It is indeed after the death of winter and everything lying low and hibernating and resting and picking up its energy, spring releases the sap. The sun shines, warms the earth, the sap comes out, and animals start having babies. The lambs, we have lambs appearing, and we have flowers appearing, and we have the winter animals, like the snakes coming out of their holes, and the frogs coming out and producing tadpoles and frogs. It is the most wonderful time of the year to see life come back. And I was in Iran and I saw this. I literally walked out on the first day of spring and I saw a flower appear. I saw the first snake. I saw the first frog. I saw everything always like for the first time. It suddenly appeared. It is a wonderful time of the year. And that is why it is so fit to celebrate the spring as the biggest festival, because it brings hope, it brings life, it brings the prospect of a future with everything growing as it should do. The order of the universe is reconfirmed with the arrival of spring. And the hope of the next season, the next harvest, is given back at the arrival of spring. So that with that, with the Gathas and the question and the awe and the wonder about the universe that God has created, that Ahura Mazda has put into existence, we are able to celebrate nature and life, and we should. And this is one of the attributes of Zoroastrians, that we celebrate. We don't celebrate things that are, if you like, I suppose you could say that it is almost supernatural that the spring should come back, but we know that that's part of the ordered cosmic order. But we don't have to make leaps of faith and believe in something we're told, because this is an experience that we can have ourselves. We can see that spring is a wonderful time of the year, and we celebrate with joy. We have a very big festival. It is the ancient Iranian festival that all Iranian peoples, whether they're Kurdish, because they're Iranian peoples, whether they're Afghans, whether they're Tajiks, whether they're Uzbeks, because Uzbekistan was part of the greater Iranian plateau before the Turkic people came down there. All of us celebrate Nowruz, the new year, the arrival of spring, as our biggest festival. And then we celebrate all aspects of nature. We have a wonderful water festival right in the middle of the hot summer. We have a water festival where we celebrate and give joy for having water, and we have fun on that day, and there's a legend associated with that. We have a wonderful fire festival in the middle of the winter, that just soon, 50 days to go before Nowruz, we celebrate the discovery of fire. Again, a legend that tells us how fire was discovered may or may not be true. It's part of the legends we find in the Book of Kings and the Shahnameh. But it is celebration of an aspect of life that we cannot do without, just as water we cannot do without fire. So we celebrate these things. We also have a harvest festival in the autumn where we celebrate the bringing in of our harvests, and we eat meat at that point because one of the rare times in the old world, even until quite recently, when meat was not commonplace for everybody. Meat is a precious commodity. We shouldn't take the life of animals for granted. People didn't eat meat as they do eat meat today. And so once or twice a year, for ordinary people, having a festival where meat was eaten was a very special time. And anyway, livestock was very important to maintain live, not dead, because it provided wool, it provided milk, and it provided babies. So why kill your livestock? And so, but we had these autumn Thanksgiving festival where meat was eaten. And it was, I say it because it was unusual. And then we have other aspects where, in our festival calendar, where we celebrate nature. We have all the days of the month are named after the elements. We have, each day has got a different name. We don't have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday repeated. We have the names of the different days. For example, we have the name of fire, we have the name of earth, we have the name of rain, we have the name of water, we have the name of animals. So each day of the month for 30 days has got a different aspect of the name, reminding us of an aspect of nature. And each month also has got a name, which is one of those 30. And when the day of the month and the same day coincide, it's a festival day, and we have feasting and getting together. Now, I should also tell you that in the Gathas, it is very clear that we have mention of men and women doing things together in the same breath, exhorted together to use their own unclouded judgment to decide if this is the path for them. No one is telling you, you do it because your mother and father told you to, or you do it because I'm telling you to. You use your own unclouded judgment, you listen with your own ears, you make your own judgment, each man, each woman for yourself. And I come back to that because gender equality is something that I think is very important. And when I've been talking about the green, if you like, the green agenda, the environmental, ecological agenda within Zoroastrianism, and I can say a lot more about that, and I will eventually, I want to move on to talk quickly about the women's position. Women in Zoroastrianism hold a very central position, an equal position, no less than men, and anybody who might tell you that women are treated differently to men is misleading and has got the wrong idea on Zoroastrianism. It is there in the text and the Gathas for us to see. We used to have women priests. Some people will deny that, but it is actually a fact. We have it in different texts. So women play a central role. Environmentalism plays a central role. And the ethical choice between good and evil is ultimately at the bottom of it all. So those are the main messages of Zoroastrianism. And the reason that we're so few here today is because we suffered an Arab invasion in the 7th century, and the mission after that was to wipe out Zoroastrianism, and it has pretty much succeeded. So that by only 100 years ago, there were only 7,500 Zoroastrians left alive in Iran. 1,000 years ago, some Zoroastrians left Iran. Things were so bad even 1,000 years ago, they went to live in India. They became known as Parsis. And there, from a few handfuls, they reached their maximum of 150,000 people. So the Parsis are those Zoroastrians who went to India. And that is probably where I should stop.
Following on from what Shaheen was saying about the history of Zoroastrianism and its ethical teachings, okay, which was a kind of microscopic look at some aspects of one of the religions of the Middle East, I want to zoom back out now, go back up, you know, to telescopic view picture of the conflicts that are going on in the Middle East and how we got here, and what specifically is the Iranian contribution. We've heard something about the original Iranian religion of Zoroastrianism. What I can say, because I'm not a specialist in any one religion, my strength is in comparative global religion and global philosophy. That's what this institute's about. And I've compared and contrasted the different histories of the religions of the Middle East across time. And what I can report, so I'm doing a kind of report on, I hope, some of the good news for the Middle East. The purpose of our seminar today is to generate light and hope and positive energy for people in these situations, okay. The first thing I want to say is one of the most incredible things about Iran is its intense commitment to spirituality, right from the very earliest days of Zoroaster to now. Something, I mean, I have Zoroastrian friends, I have Shiite Islamic friends, I have secular Iranian friends over many years. I've known professors and philosophers and so on. One of my great friends is a very eminent Iranian philosopher called Sayyid Hossein Nasr, who was the director of the Iranian Academy of Philosophy in Tehran for many years, and he's probably one of the wisest Muslims on the planet, I would say, an expert in the history of Islamic sciences particularly. And one thing that you see from the study of the history of Islam is how much Iranian spirituality has infused what we call Islam. And although Shaheen's right in saying that, yes, the Arabian armies conquered in the name of Islam Iran, not long after Muhammad died, the cultural conquest went both ways, and Iranian spirituality and thought and philosophy actually then infused into Islamic thought, and particularly among the intellectuals, and also the mystics, because the Arabian culture was, it has to be said, at a rather less sophisticated level of culture than the Iranian civilization, which was already ancient and had, an ancient spiritual tradition. One thing we know for sure is that Zoroastrian thought influenced Muhammad himself and the birth of Islam. Okay, so you see inside the Quran, which I've been commentating on in great detail, surah by surah over the last couple of years, you see again and again evidences of Zoroastrian influence on Islamic thought, right at the birth of Islam, right in the mind of Muhammad. It's absolutely certain that Muhammad knew Zoroastrians. And at that time in Arabian history, and this is something I've researched in great detail, there were Zoroastrians around in Arabia, in Mecca, in Medina. And at, so it was in the air, it was in the zeitgeist. But also, it had influenced the birth of Christian thought, because the Magi that come to visit Jesus when he's born, Magi is the word for a Zoroastrian priest. We in English use the word magician, or a magus. A magi is simply somebody who was a priest of the possibility of human perfection. The word magus comes from the root to make. Anybody that can make something is a magus. We humans are makers of things, yeah? And so we're all magi in effect. And to be able to make peace is surely the supreme magic. So I think the Zoroastrian influence on the Christian tradition, what they were doing, those magi, by coming to the infant Jesus, was saying, can this be the Sershat? Can this be the one that will redeem mankind? The other thing that Zoroastrianism gave to Christianity was the whole concept of a Christ. The whole concept of a Christ, or a Redeemer, or a Saviour, or a Messiah, was a Zoroastrian concept, long before Christianity was ever heard of. And it's called the Sershat. And that's in some of the very earliest scriptures of the Zoroastrian faith that Shaheen was talking about. So the contribution of Zoroastrianism is much deeper than people realise. That's why I, as a specialist of religious history, have always been interested in it and made my, time to study it. And then also, one has to say, it's influenced Judaism a great deal. And when the Jews were in exile, they were captured by the Babylonians, Jerusalem was conquered, taken off in slavery. It was the Zoroastrian rulers, Darius, who set them free from Babylon. Let them go back, Cyrus as well, and let them go back to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. And in Judaism, the Zoroastrians, the Persians, are regarded as a salvific people, a beneficent people. And there was thereafter a very long tradition of close, friendly relations between the Persians and the Jews. And for instance, the Talmud, the great scholarly production that rabbis study, part of it was produced in the Persian Empire in about the 6th century, before the Muslim conquest, what's known as the Babylonian Talmud. At that time, that was within the Persian domain. And so this is one of the tragedies really about the Middle East at the moment, is the war between Iran and Israel that's on the horizon is a logical and philosophical and moral error. There should be a peace between Iran and Israel. And that's what I'm and my institute are working towards, but philosophically. Okay, so that's just a kind of preamble to what I want to say. Now, this is a report from the front line of the good news, and I'm going to just bullet point a few really interesting things, like rays of light that can illuminate the wasteland, of the conflict zone that most people think of as the Middle East. First thing I want to say is that there is in Iranian philosophy an incredible tradition known as Illuminationism. The Iranian spiritual tradition known as the tradition of Irfan or Illuminationism is associated with a whole lineage of thinking that goes back to Melisandre, who's one of the greatest philosophers of Islam. And he would be on a level equated with Thomas Aquinas in the West, or Duns Scotus, or Aristotle. He wrote about ontology, he wrote about God as being. God is the being beyond being. So God isn't just any one religion or one culture or one race. He's the absolute beingness behind existence, right? And from that follows certain ethical duties for all of us, and moral duties and so on. Now, this thinking of Melisandre is actually at the core of Iranian philosophical teaching to this day. If you go to the study of philosophy in Tehran University now, you could do a PhD on Melisandre. You know, one of the greatest thinkers that this planet's ever known. And my hope is that why can't Western philosophers study these great thinkers from the Iranian past? Rather than demonizing Iran as a kind of illiterate, backward, medievalist culture, I think actually it's a duty for our intellectuals in the West to actually study their greatest thinkers and to realize how sophisticated they are. The only thing that the Iranian thinkers want to do is to keep God in the picture. Melisandre says, you know, ultimately there is an underlying spiritual reality and ends, an existential beingness, which is worthy of love and praise and adoration, which is what the Quran is all about. The Quran is simply a hymn book of praise to the Creator, to the being, right? Melisandre had also studied Aristotle. He'd studied the whole history of Greek philosophy, and he married Greek thought with Islamic thought and produced this masterpiece. Now, within the tradition of Iranian thought, therefore, there is what's known as theosophical tradition. The Illuminationist school goes back to Zoroaster as well, another great Iranian philosopher, who consciously invoked Zoroaster as an antecedent of Muhammad. What the Iranian theosophical tradition says is that Zoroaster was, and they do use the term prophet, okay, he was a great seer, let's say, or in Celtic terms he'd be called a druid, one who sees the truth, yeah? But there have been a continuous succession of them ever since Zoroaster, and Zoroaster wasn't the first. The Quran says that every tribe, every culture in human history has always had a seer or a sage. There have been countless sages and saints that come to mankind, and always will. You know, God, the beingness behind being, like the very earth we walk upon. There's never a place you can walk where it's not there, right? So at that level of what we call the understanding, that's the level that these prophets operate on. And so what Iranian Theosophy is trying to do is compare that lineage of transmission of illumination. And they consciously have studied the works of Greek philosophers, Plato, Plotinus, and they say these Greeks were also realized sages. They came in their time, Socrates, Plato, whatever, to speak to the needs of their people. And there's an incredibly sophisticated literature in this Iranian theosophical tradition. Now, that, ironically, is the school of thought that Khomeini came from. He represented this school of Iranian mysticism. He studied this stuff. Khomeini came to Iran to lead this Iranian revolution. And many great thinkers around the planet thought, you know, we'll give it a try. We'll hope that they can marry this impossible reconciliation of Iranian spirituality and modern advanced political democracy. That notion of Iranian, republic and an Islamic republic, maybe they could pull it off. The problem, of course, is they haven't quite pulled it off because in reality, as I know from many of my Iranian friends, the way they've interpreted and applied that in politics has, I think, fallen short of the high ideals that lineage should have bequeathed them. I think if Melisandre was alive today, or Suhrawardi, all these great mystics, they would look at the Islamic Republic of Iran and say, please live up to your name. You know, don't allow minorities to feel persecuted. Don't allow, I mean, I think it's shocking that we hear from the president of the World Zoroastrian Organization saying that they feel there's a concerted attempt to wipe them out in Iran. You know, that's totally un-Islamic. That's totally against the theosophical wisdom of Iranian Shi'ism. They should regard them as elder brothers and sisters and be honoured that they share the same land with them. Because Zoroaster was so many thousand, 2,000 years before Muhammad. And their scholars should be studying what is owed to whom. You know, it's judgment time, folks. You have to be honest. And as our learned colleague said, probity and honesty in financial transactions is a ethic for the Zoroastrians. I'd say that probity and honesty in intellectual transactions is also a duty upon us all. And that means being honest about who you borrow from, who you receive ideas from. We all receive ideas, you know. And nobody lives in a vacuum. So the only solution to me, because of that, has to be love. We've all been influenced and inspired by so many people, yeah, that we should therefore learn to love each other. And that is the very tradition of Iranian Theosophy. You know, if Melisandre were here in this room, he would agree with every word I'm saying, and he would say, that's what I was trying to say. Okay, so that's, you see, my view as a philosopher is, therefore, we really have the potential to make a very high peace between Iran and the West. I don't want just a boring old peace where a bunch of corrupt diplomats come together and sign a document and they're already cheating. I want the peoples of the West and the people of Iran to make a very high peace, which is enlightenment, planetary enlightenment, awakening. Okay, that's what I think we have the potential for. That's why these great teachers have sown that seed for us. Okay, let's take another guy, Rumi. Everybody loves Rumi. You know, one of the greatest poets who ever lived. I have one of my most treasured books, Open Secret, by Rumi. I'm going to read you just a very brief poem. Last night, my teacher taught me the lesson of poverty. Having nothing and wanting nothing. I am a naked man standing inside a mine of rubies, clothed in red silk. I absorbed the shining, and now I see the return. I see the ocean, billions of simultaneous motions moving in me. A circle of lovely, quiet people becomes the ring on my finger. Then the wind and thunder of rain on the way. I have such a teacher. You know, this was one of the great thinkers of the planet. What language is he writing in? He's writing in Iranian. He's writing in Persian. He was a Persian philosopher and a mystic from the school that I'm talking about. So he bequeathed to mankind this universal spirituality, on the basis of which we can make this high peace that I'm talking about. You know, for all the lovers of Rumi out there, I think, you know, we really need to draft a peace manifesto for the planet based on the mutual enlightenment that he talks about. The shift from the I to the we consciousness. Another great poet from Iran is Hafiz, from Shiraz. Another of the great luminaries of universal mysticism. Okay, again, writing in Persian. Writing in Shiraz, some of the most beautiful verses. And to this day, Persians, I had Afghan students once that told me in Afghanistan, they traditionally just open the volume of Hafiz at random, put their finger on it, and that's the quote for the day. That's the reading for the day, a bit like we do here in the Castle of the Muses, we'll do readings. They do that from Hafiz, and he always speaks to their condition, whatever, like Puritans used to do with the Bible in the 17th century. And I've been on Druid camps where people are reading Hafiz. You know, he's a universal mystic that speaks to the human condition. So, to me, there's such a wealth of resources in this tradition that why on earth? I mean, is it really the best thing the West can do is to think of dropping bombs on them? Is that really what the West wants to do, is start a war against Iran, against these people? as a philosopher, I have to speak out against that possibility. You know, it was the Iranian people, the Zoroastrians, that gave a home to the academy when the Christian fanatics under Justinian closed the Academy of Athens. And the Persians gave a home to the fleeing philosophers, the last remnants of pagan Greek philosophy. There's such an irony in that, given that the Greeks and Persians had fought. You know, we've all seen the film 300 and so on. You know, they're supposed to be enemies, but actually they were of the same noble stock. So I think, no, we don't want more world wars in the Middle East. Thank you very much. What we want is an authentic high peace. Okay, let's look across at America. Let's say, well, Iran seems quite in line. What's America up to? Where are their great philosophers? After all, they're kind of bankrolling this project of wars in the Middle East. They're the country that everyone's protesting against. Have they got any philosophers we can talk about? Well, actually they do. And as a historian of philosophy, I can report happily that there is a tradition in American thought called Transcendentalism, which was associated with New England, universities of Harvard and Boston, and it was associated with Emerson and Thoreau, the two great sages of American philosophy. Emerson, who was trained as a minister, became a Unitarian and then became a kind of freelance philosopher, and he wrote a book of essays that influenced the 19th century more than any other thinker, really. Thomas Carlyle met him and was inspired by him. Carlyle was the great Scottish Victorian philosopher of Britain who founded the London Library. And actually, very interesting little snippet, Carlyle took Emerson to Stonehenge. And one day I'd like to write a play about them wandering around Stonehenge talking about the Druids together. Now Emerson and Thoreau had studied Eastern mysticism. Okay, the reason they couldn't accept orthodox, conventional Christian theology was they found it too narrow-minded, too small. They said, well, okay, look, you know, Logos, Son of God, fantastic idea, but surely that Logos is in all of us. Surely the incarnation of the divine spirit is in every human being. And that was what Emerson said. He said, the divine mind works through us all. And he founded the tradition of New England Transcendentalism, which became, I think, the main philosophy in the USA. If you go to the average American seminar or discussion group, there'll now be a kind of blend of what's called New Age thinking or New Thought thinking. If you talk to Americans, and I mean intelligent, educated, successful, the kind of people that run Apple and Google and, you know, the movers and shakers of America, they're influenced by this idea, yes, we can do it because we're ontologically equal to you. Yeah, where people like Steve Jobs are coming from. It's based on this New England Transcendentalist idea, which is exactly the same. This is the good news I'm sharing. It's exactly the same as the insights of Iranian Theosophy. Okay, Emerson is the Melisandre of America. The basic idea of New Thought, which is the name that was given to this tradition in the early 19th century, is that as we think, so we generate reality. It underlays the whole idea of the book The Secret, or The Magic, which is a popularized American version of this idea of New Thought or metaphysics, that our consciousness determines the reality that shapes our lives. As we think, so we become. So we have the power to shape our world, okay? Now that idea, which is now called, sometimes it's called New Age thinking, and it's very popular, it's all over YouTube, there are endless speakers, motivational speakers, that try and get people to wake up to the power of their own consciousness, right? That is exactly what Iranian Theosophy has been saying. That's exactly what Zoroastrian and that Irfanic tradition has been saying. Only, and this is where they need to have a dialogue, the Iranians would say, yes, yes, but you have to do it with God's help. God is the supreme thinker, the absolute artisan behind all existence. So you can't sort of think your way to enlightenment in a cheating way. And you certainly can't buy it. You can't do sort of levels of training in some kind of, you know, salesmanship gimmick. You have to genuinely get there with God's help, right? And it should be available for the poor, not just the wealthy. You can't sort of buy enlightenment. There's a tendency, you know, the Iranians would say, in American thought, to kind of package wisdom as a business and create some new religious movement. Iranians say, no, we'll just stick with the traditional prophets we've got, that's enough. and we all have seeded within us that divine potential. So that's the conversation that needs to be had. By and large, the Americans are probably, you know, like the Iranians, one of the most religious nations on the planet. They deep down know that God has to be with them. Obama, bless him, when he was accepting the body of the American ambassador killed in Libya, you know, he knows, he invokes the divine mercy on the situation. But I think what I'm saying as a philosopher is we can go one step further than just making pious speeches. We need to get our greatest sages and thinkers actually working together on mapping the details of how we can access that grace and make it possible for mankind to share the benefits of peace rather than the horrors of war. This is what I'm calling preemptive theurgy, if you want. Preventative theurgy. It's doing God's work to make a difference. The secret has been handed down from generation to generation, okay? And the Zoroastrians were among the first that we know to begin to articulate it. Zoroaster was an illumined man who realised the power of good mind, vohumana, right? The more you read into Zoroastrian thought, the more you realise it's very similar to yoga, which is all about disciplining consciousness. And the fact that these seers, the Vedic seers and the Zoroastrian seers, came from the same root is not surprising. Well, it was there also in the Greek tradition of Plato and the Academy. And what I'm arguing as a philosopher in the Western tradition is that all academics over the planet should also, you know, waken up to their high calling too. Too often, an academic's job is seen as one of skepticism and the damping down of enthusiasm, the kind of the blocking of people's inquiries into ultimate truth because it doesn't exist. Because it's a sort of polite, skeptical secularism is the dominant mode of Western academia. I think, with all due respect to my academic colleagues, that is doing a disservice to the next generation of students. It's doing a disservice to the heritage we've inherited. Just as Shaheen talks about her Zoroastrian heritage, I'd like to say on behalf of the kind of Western academic tradition, going back to Plato and the founders of the Academy, there's a tradition there of profound reverence for divine inspiration. When Plato set up the Academy and put a temple to the Muses at the heart of it, he wasn't joking. He meant that real knowledge comes from divine inspiration. The Muses genuinely give insights of wisdom and enlightenment to mankind through the poets, through the philosophers, through the musicians, through the artists, through the dancers, through all that work with beauty. So I think we need to live up to that tradition, and that's what we're trying to do here in the Castle of the Muses. The Persian-Greek Wars. One of the things I've studied as a transpersonal historian in my doctoral thesis, by looking at Jung's theories of the archetypes, which are the kind of constellations of consciousness and the constellations of the collective unconscious. Jung empirically, as a scientist, argued that consciousness that we experience as individuals is part of a wider sea of consciousness. And things like the phenomena of telepathy and sharing of thought across distances seems to point to the fact that our individual sense of I, our self-consciousness, exists in a kind of sea of consciousness, right? So therefore, these archetypes, as Jung calls it, are like, if you want, whirlpools in the collective sea of the unconscious, which then take specific forms. They constellate. And how do they work out over time in history? That's what transpersonal history is about, is looking at the fields of the invisible energy patterns of the collective unconscious. And do conflicts that have occurred in the past reoccur in different generations? One of my fears is that the American-Iranian war of rhetoric that's going on the planet, the kind of war of words, is a throwback to the ancient Greek versus Iranian thing. You know, because Washington is very much the Hellenic capital of the world. You know, it's the new Rome. Caesar was inspired to his conquests in the West by Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great destroyed the Persian Empire. He burned Persepolis, which was their capital. I think this was a war crime, personally, because, you know, much of their wonderful libraries and things went up in smoke. And as a scholar, it's an absolute crime. You know, the man was not faithful to his teacher Aristotle and became, I think, a kind of, well, he lost the plot, Alexander. He promised well. He got an A for his first few years of studies, and then, you know, he became a tyrant. And Caesar modelled himself on Alexander. And so the West has that concept of we can solve things by the sword. That's what Alexander tried to do, it's what Caesar tried to do, it's what Hitler tried to do, it's what Stalin tried to do. It's what all these warlords tried to do. And you can't, as a Druid who opposed the Roman imperialist attempts to take over Europe through thought and teaching and wisdom, right? What we said to Caesar is you can't conquer people's hearts through violence. You can only use love. But unfortunately, Washington and America has inherited that kind of Caesar approach to politics. So it tends to think if we can drop bombs on it, that'll solve the problem, which has proven to not work in Afghanistan or Iraq. You know, I think it's time for a deep soul searching on the part of America. The dropping bombs solution, Caesar solution, never works. What you have to do is the illuminationist, the wisdom tradition, the Emerson, the Melisandre solution, the Plato solution, which is actually learn, talk, discuss, fall in love with each other, fall in wonder together. And that would be possible then, that we can create a peace between Iranian and Western culture. You know, there's never been an official peace treaty, so far as I know, between the ancient Persians and the ancient Greeks. Why? Was there one? Okay, well that's good. I was thinking we could organise one otherwise, but if there's been one, that's fine. Okay, so another thing that I just want to say is, speaking as a European and an expert in European history, is to just say how much European philosophy and history has been influenced and inspired by Iran. The great poets I've talked about, they were translated in the 18th century. Travellers went to Iran, as Shaheen said, and fell in love with aspects of that culture. Queen Elizabeth I sent an envoy to the Iranian court, and you know, they exchanged presents and ambassadors and so on. And I think there was an inspiration. The idea of the Orient, the Iranian Orient, really inspired European thinkers. And I know Goethe, for instance, was inspired. He wrote a diwan, a set of poems, East-West diwan it's called, which was an attempt to marry Oriental poetic styles with Western poetic styles, one of his great masterpieces. Goethe read the Quran. He was inspired by Islam to reinforce his own belief in spirituality. As a Western thinker, he nevertheless believed there is a universal deity underpinning all existence, and you know, his oeuvre is an attempt by the West to kind of to take seriously the claims of Eastern thought and search for the links. Okay, there's an even deeper tradition in the Middle East, though, before even Zoroastrianism. Going back to pre-Persian Mesopotamian traditions, Sumerian literature, Akkadian and Babylonian traditions. Now these are very interesting. In the Middle East, the Persian culture was overlaid over these earlier civilizations, and archaeologists and scholars have dug up the Sumerian texts and the Babylonian tablets and Akkadian. They found in there many of the sources of biblical literature, many of the wisdom traditions, go right back, things like the Noah's flood legend. These are Sumerian in origin. And one of my great griefs over the Iraq war and the violence in Iraq is that this is the motherland of all mankind. This is where mankind first started learning to write. Okay, rather than bombing and killing the descendants of those people, we should be surely studying together and learning to praise ultimate truth through the different lenses that each culture provides. So where now is the wisdom of the priests of Nebo, who was the god of wisdom to the ancient Babylonians, or Gilgamesh, the great hero who went to the underworld to find the herb of immortality? This is the very first wisdom tradition of world literature. What about Utnapishtim, who was the sage, like the Druid or seer, you know, way before Zoroaster, who knew where the secret of life comes from? I think those ancient traditions of the Middle East are also precious, along with Zoroastrianism. And I would like to see a Middle East where people are free to explore and research and recover and re-access their ancient pagan heritage. These ancient wisdom traditions gave writing, gave time, gave geometry, gave astrology, astronomy to mankind. And a wise Islam, a truly wise Islam, is comfortable with that. Because true Islam, Muhammad and the original inspiration behind Islam, reverence true knowledge and true learning. That's why the Caliph Harun al-Rashid set up the Beit al-Hikmah in Baghdad, the House of Wisdom, and translated all these ancient scriptures into Arabic. That's what we need, is a new renaissance of learning, a new reverence for learning in the Middle East. And there the Jews and the Muslims and the Christians and the Zoroastrians and the pagans can sit down in peace and learn from each other and study with each other. They may disagree, but they won't have to shoot and bomb each other. I'm speaking again on behalf of the ancient Druid traditions. That's the kind of layer in the Celtic world, going back to thousands BC, when our Middle Eastern cousins were developing the first cities and inventing writing and so on. All I'm saying as the peace Druid of Britain is, please make peace with yourselves. The reality between the Christian Bible, the Jewish Bible, the Islamic Quran, and so on. They're all much, much later than the ancient wisdom of Neolithic civilizations, which we Druids come from, Stonehenge cultures, Navebury. And these books should not be an occasion for such violence. You know, reason and authentic spiritual empiricism should be the common faith of all mankind. The other things are just variants. And that was Sir Isaac Newton's point when he wrote his work on religion. He said that mankind all comes from one spiritual heart, which is white light. The other colours, the variants, come as the rainbow. They come later. So, another tradition that is important is the Baha'i religion, another voice from Iran, which is kind of an offshoot of enlightened Sufi Iranian Theosophy. All that tradition I was talking about was filtered through Baha'u'llah and the founders of the Baha'i religion. And they're very enlightened people. Again, they shouldn't be persecuted, in my opinion. They have much to say for peace around the planet, and they should be at the table of the conversation as to the sharing of wisdom, the banquet of wisdom that this planet needs, rather than the destruction. And finally, in this sort of attempt to shed light on where we can go for resources of peace, I would say the Sufi tradition, again, which is very widespread around the planet now, is an immense resource we can go for spiritual inspiration for peace and justice. The Sufi wisdom was inspired greatly by the Iranian traditions, and I could read the name lists of the great Sufis of Iran and still be here a year from now. You know, in the name of those invisible masters and saints and sages, I'm saying, you know, that it's time to make peace in this region. And the West should think very, very carefully, and Israel, I think particularly, I have a profound love for Israel. I've been there many times, I have many Jewish friends. You know, Israel needs to think very carefully about how to find peace with her neighbours. Surely what one does, and this is in the Torah, is you're reverential to the people in whose lands you travel. Abraham, when he came to Canaan, you know, he was reverential to the local people, and he made sure he bought the land where he's buried with Sarah and so on. And I think that willingness to learn is at the heart of the rabbinical tradition, the heart of Judaism in its best. The other thing I would say is that the Kabbalah and Jewish spirituality has been strongly influenced by Iranian thought. And the whole idea of the Seishand, the Messiah in Judaism. Gershom Scholem wrote a wonderful study of the history of the Messiah in Judaism. You know, many Jews still look for a Messiah, and it would be wonderful if some one person would come forward and you know, play that role. But I think what history is showing us is that, as Krishnamurti said, the Messiah is a state of consciousness that we all have to develop. This is something maybe we can discuss a bit later, but my reading of the Seishand story is it's when the awareness of goodness, of Vohumana, comes collectively to all mankind. It can't be just one individual who does it, one man or woman. It's a state of awareness. And that's very much what both American New Age thinking at its best and Iranian theosophical thinking say. It's a collective enlightenment we need on the planet. And surely, At that point, you know, that's when we reach the Saoshantic moment, let's say. And at that point, we can get peace on this planet. So I think encoded in this legends of, you know, the apocalyptic traditions, you know, is the secret to peace. What's going on the planet, tragically, is they're being misread, over-literalized, and therefore made into a recipe of violence. You know, the thought there's got to be some sort of Armageddon. No, there's got to be a planetary awakening, and that's the choice. Anyway, what I've tried to do in this little talk, and I'm going to finish now, and we'll have some questions, is summarise a few what I see as points of light, points of hope for mankind. Why discourse between Iranian and Western thinkers can be a ray of light rather than despair, and to try and create a new narrative with your help. Okay, and through my institute and its contacts, and through the help of the angels and the you know, whatever it is that guide the good natures of human beings, to create a new narrative of peace on this planet. Because I have a fear that the military-industrial complex, the officials that run the foreign ministries, the officials that make the bombs and the weapons and the Pentagon, you know, the employees, the military employees and so on, they're working to a narrative which is self-serving. In effect, they want more wars, because then they get bigger budgets, more security, you know, and bigger payrolls. I'm saying to the human beings left on this planet, let's wake up, take the power back from the military-industrial complex. Even Eisenhower, as he was leaving office, said in his farewell address, I mean, one of my dear friends is the daughter of Lieutenant General Sir Harold Redman, who rode the horse at Queen Elizabeth II's coronation. Redman was a very close friend of Eisenhower. And Eisenhower seriously realised that the American military-industrial complex was out of control. And he was at the top of it. He was the general in charge of D-Day. You know, at what point does the American military say, okay, we won. You know, we've got the biggest army on the planet, we can beat everybody, we won, let's put the guns down. That's what I'm saying it's time to do. You know, a peace treaty, and peace in the Middle East, not more wars. Okay, I'm going to stop there, and we can have some discussion or questions, and then we'll hear from Shaheen again. Thank you very much.